Manish, unmute yourself.
Yeah. Am I audible now?
Yeah, right, you're audible now.
Okay. We are here today at the International Symposium on India and Japan, a special strategic and global partnership in the post-COVID world, to hear and interact with some of the finest minds in the field of international relations. Let me set the ball rolling by putting up front the bold strokes, a template of sorts that will surely be followed by detailed and nuanced presentations by today's distinguished speakers, who will essentially be looking at various aims, strategies, and their consequences for both India and Japan, coupled with identifying convergences and divergences. Even a scant look at the state of play between India and Japan will tell you a resounding tale of a deepening and diversifying partnership across the entire spectrum of bilateral and multilateral diplomacy. No wonder it's characterized as Asia's fastest growing partnership by decision makers in influential capitals in Asia and beyond. I'm sure you would agree if I say it's strategic trust that's the leitmotif of this relationship. The Lobby Institute's Asia Power Index, a data-packed study of power across 25 countries in Asia, puts Japan and India as third and fourth most powerful countries in Asia after US and China. But these are neck and neck with only 1.5 point difference between them. Second, and most importantly, as Thomas Friedman has put it, before Corona and after Corona, China looms large in the calculus of both India and Japan. In both of these eras, COVID came as a lightning bolt, fortunately. In that sense, that it brought bare, again, though starkly, the power surge and a real prospect of a Chinese hegemonic order in Asia. The unresolved border disputes and not so subtle weaponization of economic interdependence by China presents a clear and present danger to both India and Japan, many would agree. This has inevitably pushed India and Japan into a tighter embrace aimed at resisting and challenging China in a variety of ways. Thus, both India and Japan now share the free and open Indo-Pacific vision and enduring US engagement of the region, deepening of ties with like-minded middle powers such as Australia, Singapore, Vietnam, and of course with each other. Prime Minister Modi put this strategic intersection very boldly and clearly in 2018 itself when he declared a strong Japan benefits India and a strong India benefits Japan. A deep dive into recent diplomatic intercourse between India and Japan tells us this story. Besides the annual summitry between the respective prime ministers, both are now a part of the Born Again Quad and Quad Plus, are together in the Japan-America-India trilateral, and possibly now, which was just talked about a couple of days ago, Japan-India-Russia trilateral too. India and Japan made global headlines with their first ever 2+2 foreign and defense ministers dialogue last November, and India's only second after the US. Japan is also India's leading economic development partner, and as I pointed out earlier, in a sign of strategic trust, has facilitated Japanese investments in its sensitive northeast border areas and the Andamans. They have also joined hands in the multilateral domains of Asia and Africa. Let me now introduce our highly distinguished speakers today. Shri Baijan Panda, who's joined us who will be giving us a special address in a couple of minutes, is the National Vice President and spokesperson of the Bharatiya Janata Party. He has been a 4-time member of Parliament of India. In his earlier corporate career, he was active in industry organizations like the CIA and FICCI. As a parliamentarian, we've all seen he has been a member of many important committees like Parliamentary Standing Committees on Finance, Home, Energy and Urban Development, and Consultative Committee for the Ministry of Finance. In Parliament and public life, J. Panda passionately espouses the cause of his home state Odisha, as well as other national issues close to his heart, such as economic development, education, information technology, and data privacy. He frequently participates in national television discussions and writes op-ed pieces in newspapers. I regularly read his columns in the Hindustan Times. He is also the author of the highly acclaimed Lutyens Maverick, published by Rupa Publications. Thanks, Shri Panda, for joining us today. It's indeed a great privilege to have you with us today. Robert Dujoric of the Temple University of Japan is the co-director of Japan's Institute of Contemporary Asian Studies. As we were discussing earlier, he first lived in Tokyo in 86-87, moved back to the city in 2004 as a Council on Foreign Relations International Affairs Fellow. During his fellowship, he was stationed at the Research Institute of Economy, Trade and Industry of the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry of Japan, prior to joining the Japan Institute of International Affairs in Tokyo as a visiting research fellow. He took his current position at the Temple University of Japan in 2007. Big thanks again for readily agreeing to host this symposium together with us. I'm extremely happy to have Professor Shrabani Roy Chaudhary, my senior colleague, expert on Japan. He has been a visiting professor of Kobe University and a visiting scholar at Japan Policy Research Institute, Ministry of Finance, Japan, and a visiting fellow and also a Japan Foundation scholar. She has authored many scholarly articles, books, and edited volumes on India and Japan. It's great to have you with us today, Professor Shrabani. Dr. Satoru Nagao is a visiting fellow at Hudson. His research area is US-Japan-India Security Cooperation. Dr. Nagao was awarded his PhD by Gakushuen University in 2011 for his thesis titled India's Military Strategy, the first such research thesis on this topic in Japan. Dr. Nagao has authored numerous books and articles on security issues, and he also writes for a column, The Age of Japan-India Alliance, at Nikkei Business, the journal of one of Japan's leading newspapers. He's obviously now the senior visiting fellow at the Hudson Institute in the US. Thanks, Dr. Satoru, for joining us this early morning from the US. Before I request Robert to take over as the chair, I just want to personally thank again Ambassador Deepa Vadva, who has joined us today. We are indeed privileged, ma'am, to have you with us. She has been India's former ambassador to Japan and a very sensible voice talking about various aspects of India-Japan relations over many years now. Thank you very much again. May I now request our co-host, Dr. Robert, to please make his remarks as to this chair. Over to you, Robert.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manish Dahabe. I'm really happy to participate in this. I'm very happy to meet many new friends and also to see my old friend, Dr. Nagao, who I think was really the first person in Japan to look at India from a security and defense point of view. Historically, security challenge has been a pathfinder and pathbreaker in this area. So I'm very happy to see him, and I would like to thank everybody for participating in this. And it's a great honor for our university to be involved in this. Thanks again.
Thank you, Robert. May I now, without further ado, request our special guest today, Shri Vaijayant Panda, to deliver a special address. Over to you, Mr. Panda. So can you unmute yourself? Please unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
Yes, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be participating in this virtual symposium. organized by the Indian Futures and Temple University. It has been my pleasure to have been involved with the India-Japan bilateral relationship as an Indian legislator. For more than 15 years, I've led several delegations of parliamentarians to Japan and have also had the pleasure of receiving many counterparts here in India and having interacted with various other stakeholders, including our distinguished diplomats, one of whom is with us, Ambassador Wadhwa, academics, people from the world of business. And I have no doubt in my mind that the India-Japan relationship is not only very special, but it is in fact crucial to the shaping of the 21st century. Now, there's traditionally been historically many cultural connections, but I'm surprised at how many people in India keep getting surprised to find out about Indian deities being available in Japanese shrines. But be that as it may, it's really only in the last 2 decades that this relationship has started getting extremely special. There are circumstances globally in geopolitics that are pushing us together. I think I've said this before, that the universe seems to be conspiring to bring India and Japan together. But beyond that, there are also specific steps taken by leaders. In particular, over the last several years, both prime ministers, Prime Minister Abe in Japan and Prime Minister Modi, have not only developed a very special friendship between themselves, but that has energized the relationship and taken it to a different level in cooperating bilaterally as well as interacting around the world and participating in geopolitics, especially as it applies to Asia, but also going beyond that. As was mentioned by Professor Davade, there was the concept of the Quad, and Quad Plus is now definitely stepping into a higher gear. This is a concept that has been around for a while, to have the US, Japan, India, and Australia cooperate. Now, these are important democracies that have a stake in the Indian Ocean region. And the Quad has had fits and starts in the past, but it's definitely stepping up. As you can see now with Australia's renewed interest in the Quad and the likely participation in this year's Malabar naval exercises, it is shifting into a different level altogether. Now, the geopolitical situation used to be the geopolitical situation that was talked about in hushed tones for much of the last 2 decades is now being spoken about more openly, which is about China's behavior. China has itself profited from the rules which guided global engagement for many decades in the post-World War II and especially the post-Cold War era. But in recent years, China has shown a disinclination to play by those same rules and has started taking many unilateral decisions, asserting itself, in fact, leading to conflict. India has experienced conflict with China just a few weeks ago, and the same kind of aggressiveness has been demonstrated by China when it comes to Japan, on the Senkaku Islands, and in fact, many other neighboring countries when it comes to issues around the South China Sea. This century has long been talked about as an Asian century. But over the last few years, it's becoming clear that yes, there are going to be important Asian aspects to this century, but it's not a unidimensional Asian century. And it obviously is shaping up in a manner that there requires concerted, coordinated effort, especially by countries that are democracies, because democracies have certain fundamental shared values. These values go deep, they are about individual rights, they are about openness, and so on and so forth. And it is important that the Committee of Nations, especially democracies, work towards ensuring that the Asian century continues to be peaceful and continues to grow with equity among all stakeholders. So this is not just about geopolitics, of course. It is about business, about the economy. Now, over these past decade or so, China has grown into the world's second largest economy, and Japan remains the third largest economy. India has become the fifth largest economy. In this situation, while India is very rapidly scaling up, it faces certain particular challenges. I've mentioned the Chinese challenges regarding conflicts, but it's more than that. China provides support to certain nations, such as North Korea, such as Pakistan, who are by any standards the bad boys of global relations. These are nations that have supported terrorism, that have had nuclear proliferation, and the shelter provided to them becomes a real hurdle in the way of the type of good relations that all these rising and emerging economies need to have. In terms of the economy, the Japanese and Indian bilateral trade, although has been growing very rapidly, still has only scratched the surface. So the latest figures from about a year ago indicate that India's exports to Japan are under $5 billion, and India's imports from Japan are nearly $18 billion. Sorry, I stand corrected, are nearly $13 billion. And it's much smaller compared to even Indian trade with China, which is undergoing great changes today because of the strains that have been faced. The two economies, the Japanese and the Indian, have enormous complementarity. Japan has a profusion of capital available at low cost. India needs a lot of capital for the immense investment it needs in infrastructure. And by the way, that's already happening. Japan is already playing a very key role in India's development of infrastructure, such as with the aid funding for our first bullet train, such as for our metro rail projects, and many others. India has certain strengths to bring to the table on the economic front in terms of our capabilities in information technology and in pharmaceuticals and several other areas. I think the potential for this is immeasurable, really, because many other countries, particularly in this post-COVID era, or particularly during the COVID era and looking forward to the post-COVID era, are rebalancing their investments in China. Many of them are, the phrase that's often used is de-risking their presence in China. And of course, this will benefit other countries as well. There are countries like Vietnam that are becoming alternate sources or rather alternate destinations for some of this investment. And India, of course, provides the scale for attracting the largest chunk of these investments on which we are working. India has made tremendous gains in the last 6 years as a place to attract investment. Its FDI investments have gone up very, very sharply. But most importantly, India has always been a tough place to do business, both for domestic investors and companies as well as foreign investors. And on this front, India has made a most remarkable improvement in the last 6 years, going from being 140 plus on the World Bank's index of ease doing business. India has made huge leaps to come into the 60th level. And it's not very far away that India will be in the top 50 and keep growing up the ranks. This is one of the key differentiators in what attracts investment. So I've spoken about the geopolitical developments that are helping shape the Asian century in a different way than had been originally expected. And I've talked about the complementarity of Indian and Japanese relationship, both on the geopolitical front as well as on the economic front. As I conclude, I want to mention the way forward. Now, besides ramping up bilateral trade, besides just attracting investment, besides Indian companies also seeking access to Japanese markets in the fields that I mentioned. There are areas such as technology and AI where Japan and India are already committed to working together. There is the India-Japan Digital Partnership and the Startup Hub. Japan already plays, by the way, a key role in important manufacturing segments in India, particularly the automotive segment. Then there are targets for maritime cooperation in the geopolitical arena to ensure that the freedom of the sea lanes are maintained. And to round all of this up is the increased cooperation with the trilateral between India, Japan, and the US, as well as the quadrilateral, including Australia. And now, as several people have mentioned, including some of the speakers, distinguished speakers at today's symposium, the Quad Plus, involving these 4 democracies plus other nations as well. In conclusion, I would like to say that the relationship is indeed at a very special place. India and Japan have been, as I said, interacting in bringing these nations together for shared interests. The special relationship between the 2 prime ministers, I believe, plays a very key role in that. So as I said, we've just scratched the surface on the economic relationship. We are doing very well on the geopolitical relationship, and the outlook is extremely good. We face indeed many challenges, as I have mentioned, but we are in a good place, and the various different forums that are being set up, both on track 1 and track 2, and many academic forums such as this, to foster this bilateral, and this bilateral being the core, the kernel of the multilateral democratic alliances that are shaping up, I think is the right way forward to keep doing more of this. So once again, thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this important symposium. I look forward also to the points to be made by the other distinguished speakers. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Mr. Panda. I think that was a very stimulating, a very comprehensive overview of the state of India-Japan relations. Obviously, you started out pointing out how crucial India and Japan ties are for really shaping of the 21st century itself. And again, the most important dynamic which many ignore is the personal chemistry, the personal sort of camaraderie, which is between Shinzo Abe, Japan's Prime Minister, and Narendra Modi, India's Prime Minister. And I think their vision, their energy has actually energized, I mean, you rightly pointed out the India-Japan relations. Obviously, a very important point which you talked about was about this whole notion of Asian century, which we all started out celebrating, but again, it has come to mean something else. And that is where, as you rightly pointed out, the role of democracies like India and Japan, and obviously the US, is going to play a very important role in the years ahead. Very important again, the whole COVID opportunity for India and Japan, which they're already, I mean, in terms of Quad Plus, I think that is a sharper movement which is happening already, and obviously you talked about how track 1 and track 2 initiatives are definitely going to propel the relationship further ahead. Thanks again. It was really a terrific presentation. With this, I now request Professor Shrabani to make her remarks. Over to you, Shrabani.
Thank you, Manish, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to engage in a discussion with such eminent people, both overseas as well as in India. I would like to do a brief presentation, and my presentation would be essentially with respect to looking at India-Japan relations but as mandated by Manish, it is supposed to be focusing only on economics. And let me put a rider out here. Given the paucity of time, I have not looked into the trade aspect, which is pretty complicated at the moment, because with a comprehensive economic partnership agreement in place, we have not been able to scale the trade between both the countries to an advantageous position that we had initially uh, thought it would be possible. And today, both the countries are engaged in looking at how to take the trade further. And we're looking at even revisiting the CEPA agreement and trying to see if we could make some more changes to this agreement such that both the countries benefit, especially with respect to certain sectors like pharma. Uh, Having set the notion that it will be focused on investment, let me move forward with giving you certain background with respect to some landmarks that has happened in this century. Um, in most of Japan's inroads into most of the Southeast Asian countries, we have seen it has essentially been the economics part of it. But often this economic engagement with these Southeast Asian countries had initially started with private sector engagement before government of Japan took over. And this, when government of Japan moved into these countries, it was essentially through the ODA, that is Overseas Development Assistance projects. And the synergy between the private sector investments through FDI and the ODA investments to engage each other in providing a better economic platform, both with respect to infrastructure and other needs of the private sector, has essentially been the game plan for Japan. However, with case of India, if you noticed, though we started off by looking at it as a partnership, which was basically engaging in economics, by 2014, the movement has been towards becoming a strategic component. And in fact, in the last a decade or so, it's the strategic component that has engaged itself so powerfully within the narrative of India-Japan relations that we have often seen, upgradation of various, private-public partnerships with respect to both investments as well as engagement in political platforms, as well as in military corporations and other dimensions, which has actually broadened the scope of India-Japan relations and not limited itself to economics. However, what has probably been a little distressing for the persons who look into the economics aspect is that investment per se, even though it's been growing, we've not been having a kind of an engagement that we would have liked, say, for instance, what Thailand or Vietnam or Indonesia can say for themselves. So having given this background, let me just quickly take you through what has happened and what we would expect post-pandemic. Certain, of course, nuclear cooperation has taken place between our countries, which has obviously been an excellent move because it allows us to engage with each other in the multilateral platforms in a much more stronger, engagements in the multilateral platforms. But if you look at India-Japan investment, the institutional actors that you have who are operating in both the countries, obviously the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of External Affairs, the Ministry of Economic Trade and Investments, as well as Ministry of Commerce and Industry. But three key agents who are stationed in India and are promoting ground level investment are the Japan Bank of International Corporations, the Japan's International Cooperation Agency, JICA, which actually looks into the ODA, that is Overseas Development Assistance, and Japan External Trade Organization, the JETRO. If you look at the Indian platforms, we do have very strong, desks that have been totally engaging only with the Japanese investors in the India-Japan Investment Promotion Partnership and the Japan Plus team, as well as the Invest India platform. The Invest India platform is a public-private partnership which actually encourages or handholds investors in India therefore giving us this, the climb that we've done from, which Sri Panda said, from 170 to today in the 60s rank in the world as country that has good business engagements with international businesses, essentially because of these kind of platforms that has been created to engage with foreign investors. With the official development assistance, three things that are very important for us to note is that we are today the topmost recipient of Japan's ODA. However, if you look at the amount, it is basically not too huge an amount as what Japan were engaging in previous to their economic downturn, as they call it. But what is important is Japan has been investing strongly into the infrastructure sector, which has obviously been the need of the private Japanese investors in India, as it has been repeatedly brought out in various surveys, either by the Japan Bank or JEPIC or JICA, JETRO. Both the surveys have often come up that it's the infrastructure that has been the huge hurdle, and therefore engaging in ODA disbursement towards infrastructure seems to be a natural move. But what we should understand when Japan comes in with an ODA disbursement in infrastructure is because they're so concerned about the quality of the infrastructure investments, that it is often takes a longer duration for infrastructure investments to be formulated and then delivered. So there is a gap of at least 5 to 7 years. We have two mega structures now in mega projects that's on, that is the Delhi Mumbai Industrial Corridor and the Chennai Bangalore Industrial Corridor, both actually taking care of a huge number of regions that have come up, which is export-led zones. That is basically the Neemrana zone, the Rewa zone. Then you move on to Chennai, Bangalore. You have a string of FDI engagement in those areas, which were not necessarily only Japanese investors, but also Korean, as well as any other various other countries' investors in these export promotion zones. With respect to foreign direct investments, we've had a yes and a no kind of situation. At times it has grown, at times it's faltered. But general foreign direct investments from Japan to India has essentially been in two sectors, that was manufacturing sectors, mainly automobile and the electronic sectors, though we have variations, which I'll go on in the next few slides. But what is interesting is we've had a sizable number of growth of Japanese business establishments in India. I would like to point out here that the Japanese business establishments in India vary in two fronts. There are ones which are totally engaged in manufacturing and producing goods in India, whereas there are certain ones which are only business establishments, which are actually bidding time or trying to understand the country, our country, which is obviously pretty difficult for it from a Japanese business point of view, as has been mentioned by Sri Panda also, that therefore it becomes interesting that when you see this number, we have to always keep in mind that there is a distinction. This business establishments means anything that is Japanese business who have even set up a small office in India. Sectors that have attracted FDI flows, if you look at it, it has obviously been automobile and automobile industry as well as electronics. But what is interesting is the new sectors that has had flow of Japanese investment is drugs and pharmaceuticals, as well as telecommunications and certain amount of service sectors. In automobile sectors, obviously, the big story in India has always been Maruti, but what is important today is we have few hubs that has been created, and this is essential because when we look at decoupling issue that is being much talked about, then it is these hubs that would have to be made more attractive to engage Japanese investors. And these hubs are essentially one which is around Delhi, which is the NCR region. Then there is a southern states of Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. And you have the western states, that is Gujarat and Maharashtra. So this is the essential automobile hub that we have. With the electronics, we have obviously the Neemrana again hub that is very close to Delhi. And we have a huge hub that is being established in Andhra Pradesh. currently, this is essentially the reason why, if you look at the current policies that is developing, the states of India are also taking playing a larger role in engaging with the center to attract the Japanese investors. In the sectoral investment, what is very critically important for us, because we essentially need to today diversify and attract companies from pharmaceutical industry, from telecom, from consumer goods, food processing, and renewables, though we have few already engaging in India. It is important to promote these engagements across back into Japanese business world, such that other businesses also feel more assured that they could be able to operate in our country. Current indicators are what you see on the slide right now, but as I've said, the balance of trade between Japan and India stands out as a place where we could engage much more productively, and probably find sectors of engagement with respect to trade also. So FDI's puzzle is essentially been this, that though it is cordial and growing relationship, we have so much of engagement at the political level, but we still continue to lag as far as China goes, and with countries like even Vietnam, Indonesia, and Thailand. And it is in this view that the joint statements of prime ministers every year refer to this, and are constantly engaging in finding newer ways and means to actually promote the private investment from Japan. Concerns of Japanese investors over time has always been the list that you see today. Only thing is, land acquisition, which used to be upfront for Japanese investors, today have been scaled down. And as far as the current JEPIC report goes, it is considered to be, India is supposed to be a country that as a top destination for manufacturing companies in medium term. It is very, very encouraging, therefore, and I think with the current situation, it would be the most ideal time for India to step up and try to engage with Japanese companies and seek private investments. Obviously, the two strategic investments that has happened within India, and that shows that strategic component of Japanese engagement in India, is the Northeast India engagement with respect to not only infrastructure, but also producing food, also getting into private FDI in food processing and other options that has been created with respect to, say, IT engagement, etc. And of course, the small ODA that has gone into Andaman and Nicobar Islands for water, drinking water, could be first, the only country that has been allowed to engage in Andaman and Nicobar Island, given the sensitivity strategically, is a kind of, a hope that we would see a larger engagement for Japan. The AAGC has also been a third country option which has emerged for India-Japan bilateral relations, moving into third country operations, and AAGC is a platform that we look forward to engaging with Japan. But the pandemic and the new equations which would be is essentially the fact that the reorganization of production network, which is expected to happen, having had two important things, that of China's initial lockdown and Japan's economic downturn because of China lockdown, and then subsequent lockdown of various countries at various points of time. And therefore, the production network, which cannot be centered around China, has been understood, and therefore the decoupling issue that has been much talked about. Along with it, you have various other newer thing of digital, artificial intelligence, 5G components of economics, which would definitely change not only the way companies operate, but also how the world links up in the future. And therefore, the global shipping net routes that we've been much talked about could also be looking at a huge change because of digitalization and artificial intelligence. And therefore, the entire Indo-Pacific zone region, which might be considered to be geostrategic, has a huge geo-economic component, and it is essentially this particular region that would have to be maintained in a way that the liberal order, world order had always engaged upon and wanting to sort of maintain that free and fair, open Indo-Pacific. And it is this which has actually become the central reason why Japan, India would be engaging itself in a much more convergently, such that they could take forward their whole concept of economic engagement and strategic engagement. Of course, Abe has designed a package which has been, supporting companies that are willing to come out of China. But as the narrative moves, it is not going to be very easy. And therefore, there is going to be a lot of engagements from the governments to encourage these companies to move out of China. Modi, our Prime Minister, has unveiled a huge number of packages. But what is very interesting is that lots of restrictions with respect to takeover acquisition in neighboring nations have been stalled, and especially to ensure that we do not have Chinese investments. And we also see that with this Atma Nirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, which is basically a self-reliance program mapped with the Make in India program, seems to have a content which would encourage more of foreign investments, and therefore create platforms for even Japanese investors to engage in India. In this particular sense, as I've stated before, states of India have been much more aggressive this time. You have Gujarat, which has actually written to Japanese government and said that they would be offering from land to subsidies. All kind of invitations have been sent across. The UP government has also made overtures with respect to show causing its business, which is basically since it's bordering Japan, bordering Delhi, it becomes a very good platform, and then can also become hub for defense activities, because there's a airport that would be built in near future in Jewar, which is in part of UP. So the UP has also put its hat into this whole thing of attracting Japanese investors. Case in point, I feel, with two alternative hubs that can be really looked upon is the electronic hub. Already much talk has started happening in March 2020. Assumption is that we will take it forward, especially in the post-pandemic era. But the other industry, especially with the white paper on defense, which has come out in the month of July, one assumes that defense industries could also get into a lot of foreign investments into India, because Japan is willing to go forward with engaging in defense sector in various in outside Japan, and therefore could become a very good route. And since we have also opened up our defense industry, it could be a good place to engage ourselves in our investment programs. In nutshell, I think India-Japan investment relations rests on three important things. That is growing synergy between India and Japan on their commitment and ground vision for a free, open Indo-Pacific. It is also India is also targeting Japanese investments with strategically positioned states, and therefore would be a very good engagement for India. And third, this Indo-Japan bilateral partnership is also looking at promoting partnership in the third country, which will be mutually very beneficial with respect to activities in the multilateral forums. With this, I think I would conclude my presentation and look forward to engaging in a debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we now have Dr. Nagao, but Dr. Manish, maybe you want to say something?
Thank you very much. Can I start? Okay, I'll start. Thank you very much. Repeated to say, it is a great honor for me to join. And India is a great country, and India will be greater more. So I will use slide today So I'm preparing. Can you see the slide? Excuse me, is there no problem?
That's okay. I can hear you.
Thank you very much. So I'll start my presentation. The title of my presentation is Examining the Similarity Between the Indo-China Border Area, the South China Sea and the East China Sea. What should we do? So this is the security aspect of the India and Japan cooperation. How to deal with China's expansion is the theme. So while the world faced the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic, China has undertaken a large number of aggressive military operations throughout the Indo-Pacific region, including India-China border and the South China Sea and the East China Sea. So in the India-China border area, the 20 brave Indian soldiers were sacrificed their lives. So why China is provoking us? What should we do? With regard to China's motivation, there is similarities between India-China border area, the South China Sea, and East China Sea. Examining these similarities help to contextualize China's action and indicate neighbors like India and Japan should respond to China's provocations. So there are 3 similarities. First one, the first similarity of note is China's repeated disregard for the international law when laying claim to new territory. In the South China Sea, the Permanent Court of Arbitration at the Hague rejected China's claim to sovereignty over much of the South China Sea in 2016. Despite this, China continued to claim and occupy the area. In the East China Sea, China did not claim the Senkaku Island before the 1970s. China's attitude has since changed due to the potential existence of oil reserve in East China Sea. Now, the Chinese Coast Guard ship entered Japan's territorial water surrounding the Senkaku Island and pursued Japanese fishing boats to claim their sovereignty over this sea. The non-observance of this international border further demonstrates China's attitude of territorial entitlement and disrespect for the international law. And China is expressing the same attitude at the India-China border. In this case, Dr. Lobsang Sengye, the president of the Tibetan Exile Administration, expressed that the Dalai Lama considers the disputed territories of both Ladakh and Arunachal Pradesh to be part of India. So there is a high possibility that China's claim to the area along the India-China border is legally baseless. So second recurring facet of China's behavior is its exploitation of the military power vacuum. For example, in the South China Sea, China occupied half of the Paracel Island just after France withdrew from Indochina in the 1950s. In the 1974, China expanded its presence to all of the Paracel Island after the US withdrew from South Vietnam. Additionally, China occupied 6 features of the Spratly Island after Soviet Union decreased its military presence in Vietnam in 1988. And again in 1995, China laid claim mischief after US troops withdrew from Philippines. So in India-China border area, the military balance has changed recently, causing China to mistakenly infer that there is power vacuum. According to the CIPRI military expenditure database published in April 2020, from 2010 to 2090, so 10 years, China increased its military expenditure 85%. In comparison, India increased its expenditure 37%. So India military defense along the India-China border are not weak. But the gap between the two countries' defense budget has widened in last decade. So along with the greater relative increase in military spending, China's military activities have also increased. In 2011, China has made about 213 incursions into the line of actual control. But since 2011, number of the incursions have increased greatly. And last year, the number reached 663 incursions. This year, when India and the world are focusing on COVID-19 crisis, China is trying to exploit the situation even more aggressively. And indeed, what happened in the India-China border area is what happened in the East China Sea, including sea around Senkaku Island of Japan. This is the number of China's vessels identified within the contiguous zone in the water surrounding the Senkaku Island in Japan. When we compare the two figures, we will find one similarity. So I overlapped two figures. Since 2011, the activity has increased in both areas. And in 2090, the activity has increased again. So what happened in the India-China border is what happened in the East China Sea. Finally, China's arguably lawless expansionism is usually paired with an effort to exclude countries that are outside the region. In the East China Sea and South China Sea, China blames its assertive behavior on the intervention of outsiders. Similarly, in the case of the India-China border, China is trying to halt Indian cooperation with the US, Japan, and Australia, which India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has stepping up of late. So recently, India just concluded a logistical support agreement with Australia. If India and Japan conclude a similar pact, all of the 4 countries of Quad will have the agreed logistical support agreement. In case of Japan, Japan called this agreement Acquisition and Cross-Service Agreement, ACSA, instead of LSA, but same purpose. China believes agreement among these 4 countries an effort at containment and therefore want to stop them. So to do so, which country would China choose to pressure? The most likely answer is India, because China and India share a nearly 4,000 kilometer land border, unlike the US, Japan, and Australia, allowing China to leverage its army. And moreover, China perceives that it can more easily persuade India to leave the US-led security framework, because India and the US are not formal allies. So much like its behavior in the South China Sea, China is using its military to pressure India to drop foreign partnership that might inhabit China. So China's lack of respect for international law, expansion of the territorial claims where there are power vacuum, and effort to exclude outside actors from the regional intervention are all common theme of China's exploit in the East China Sea, South China Sea, and now India-China border. The question remains, how do countries affect China's ambitions, like India and Japan, respond? Knowing the pattern of China's behavior pointed towards the answer. We should do the opposite of what China wants. Firstly, countries around China must continue to respect the rule-based order grounded in the current international law. Second, China's neighbors need to fill the military power vacuums by increasing our defense budget. Third, countries around China need to continue to enhance security cooperation with the US and Australia and other like-minded countries. When India, Japan cooperate with the US and Australia or other like-minded countries, the partnership should promote not only regional security to fill the power vacuum, but also economic cooperation. The strength of China's army depends on the ample military budget. Thus, China's neighbors should avoid supporting China's economy and hence the funding its military by strengthening the relation with the US, Australia, and other like-minded countries. If those in the Indo-Pacific region care to limit China's territorial encroachment, and we must directly counter China's behaviors and intentions. That is my presentation, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much.
Audible?
Yeah, I will try to end my PowerPoint data. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we see your nice face. That's much better. I don't know, Manish, if you want to say a few things, or we start with questions.
Am I audible now? Yeah, I think I'm audible. Hey, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nagao. But before that, let me also thank Professor Shrabani. There was some technical glitch and I completely lost connection. I think she made very interesting points on the India-Japan strategic, on the economic aspects, and covered large ground. Obviously, she also talked about the ODA and strategic investments. Again, especially highlighting the post-pandemic or even during the pandemic, what is the way ahead? Obviously, focusing more also on the defense side of it, on the electronic arena of Japanese investments, and rightly concluding about the possible synergies and challenges in the India-Japan economic partnership. Also, coming to Dr. Nagao, I think excellent presentation, really, and I think it was a very innovative way of looking at how, the starting point of looking at how India and Japan could come together was exactly by looking at how, they were affected individually, by obviously the border conflict, India and China and Japan and China. So I think that was excellent. And obviously talking about, you rightly concluded there are three pathways to further strengthen the relationship. Obviously international law, increasing the defense budgets. I think that's a very important suggestion. And obviously, which everyone would definitely agree, is aligning closely with like-minded countries like the US and Australia. Thank you, Nagao. As I said earlier, we have Ambassador Deepa Wadhwa with us, who was India's ambassador to Japan. Ma'am, if you could just make remarks, we'll be extremely glad.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Manish. Very nice to see certainly the Honorable Member of Parliament, Shri Jay Panda, who I've known from my association from, when he used to come very often to Japan. Shabani is a friend, but very happy to see Naga-san, who, whom I had the pleasure of knowing while I was in Tokyo. So wonderful to see you and to hear you again. Really happy to be here and participate in this symposium. I just want to talk about a few things. First of all the presentations have been absolutely exceptional. I think Mr. Panda spoke about the centrality of the India-Japan relationship in the geopolitics of Asia and the Indo-Pacific. And I think this is something which is, which both our prime ministers have said. In fact, I recall Prime Minister Modi on his first visit to Japan said that the future of Asia is going to be determined by this relationship. And I think this is something which is very important, and which is why we have this special strategic partnership. And it's founded in a very strong foundation of not only popular perceptions on both sides and our cultural affinities, but I think bipartisan support across political parties. That gives a certain continuity and a strength to the relationship, which is something which I think, irrespective of which government comes and goes, all leaders, that this is going to be a very important relationship. And yes, it has transformed in the last 2 decades of the century, which has been greatly to the benefit of us, and I think to the stability of the region. Now, I just want to make some very practical points as a practitioner of diplomacy, in the sense that over the years, we have seen many statements, many targets, many agreements signed between the two countries, because we do have a structure of dialogue with the prime ministers at the head of it, and then, of course, various ministers down to the official level. Now, I think at some point of time, we've got to sit down and look at this and see how much has been achieved and how much is yet to be achieved. I think in the area where we can be very happy is probably defense and security, where the movement has been pretty swift, may I say, because it started about 2008 in reality. So I think this is one area where we are not only seeing progress, but we can hope for more. I hear Nagao-san speak about AXA, and I hope that at the next summit, which has been postponed twice, hopefully it will happen, one's hearing of October, that this will be something that we will be able to finalize. And yes, as you say, that's going to make a lot of difference because all of us 4 countries who are the so-called members of the Quad would then have these mutual logistical agreements between us and would help interoperability. So I think that is anyway going to really change qualitatively change the nature of the Quad. The political relationship, again, I went back, is really without much issues. The defense and security relationship is doing well. We have exercises across the 3 services. One has really seen the progress of this relationship on the security side. There's a lot of satisfaction. There are 2 areas I think we should continue to look at, and that is the agreement that we had on joint co-production and of defense equipment. And now with our new policies, what really can we do here? I think there is more to be done. There's been more talk than really movement on the ground. Again, another interesting agreement that we had signed was really on exchange of intelligence. And in the context of what has happened on the India-China border, I certainly think that this is something that we can work more. I'm sure it is being worked, but this is something where I think we have to see where we can work more on exchange of information. The economic side is really where I think we feel that, and Shabani has mentioned it, and others also, I know the perception is that we've really not been able to completely exploit the potential. We talk about complementarities. We've talked about, really big targets of what can be done. We're very grateful for the development cooperation and JICA's projects in India. Some of them are projects which are really transformative in nature. For example, the Delhi Metro, you have the DMIC, and now the high-speed rail. So that there is the development cooperation part of it. But I think insofar as trade and investment is concerned, we have underperformed. And here now is the opportunity. And the opportunity is because of what has happened with COVID, and we are really looking at all the production patterns and production chains in the world. Now, I have something very, I think, practical to say, that we find that certainly, these two major sectors that we have here, electronics and automobiles, and now drugs and pharmaceuticals, we do have Japanese companies who are manufacturing in India, and they are targeting the Indian market. But what this COVID pandemic, I think, showed was that even in these sectors, there's a great dependence on China, on supply chains from China. And I think here is it's not going to happen overnight, but still a low-hanging fruit in the sense of when we look at diversification of supply chains, and in the context of Japan and India, I think we should be hoping that these supply chains, that this production should certainly move to India because it is targeting the Indian market. Again, as far as India is concerned, I know the perception is that it's not very, despite, however many notches we have come down in terms of, or gone up in terms of ease of doing business, it's still seen as compared to ASEAN as not a very easy place to do business with. So I think the Japanese are very forthright in telling us what their problems are, but I think we're going to take them really seriously. And as Shabani mentioned, there are many things that we can do. We already do have some industrial parks. So we not only have, Japan-focused industrial parks for Japanese companies, but I think we also need to look at sectoral parks, as say electronics or automobiles. And recently there was talk about having another industrial park in the Northeast, and I think in Assam, and I think that was a wonderful, if that is going to be true, that's wonderful news, and we can see what we can do for the development of the Northeast. But we know exactly, I think, where we want to get. We know how to get there. We somehow are not being able to work this adequately. And I do think that this post-COVID world, our own importance that we are placing on the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, which is actually self-reliance in the sense of actually what this means is that we need more investments. We want to be able to produce in India, not only for the Indian market, but of global standards. And here I cannot think of a better partner than Japan. So great satisfaction in where we have reached in every one of these areas. Nagao-san, what he had to say about what we three of us, what both countries can do in these three areas where we are finding, a much more assertive and aggressive China. Very important, very interesting point that he said that, actually the number of incursions have coincided in terms of time insofar as our land border with China is concerned, and the East China Sea and the area around the Senkakus. So I think these are areas where we need to work together. And again, these are a few, I think, more, as I said, practical points from the point of view of a practitioner, but it's a great relationship, and I'm sure that, going forward, there's much we can do together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Vadava. I think you really hit it where what exactly needs to be done in the India-Japan relationship. And obviously, a very important point that there is a strong bipartisan support for stronger India-Japan relations. And obviously, the COVID opportunity, I think no one would really, everyone of us would really agree that the COVID really represents a geopolitical and economic opportunity. The point is, to what extent can the MEA from Indian side and the foreign ministry from Japan can really pull in their brains together and really get this going. Thank you, Ambassador Vadava. It was really a very useful, very productive suggestions you made. I hope we all can take this ahead. With this, I now open up to Q&A. Yeah. So I'm still looking at the chat box. So maybe Ambassador Vadava, would you like to start? In fact, till we get, do you have any questions for the speakers? Mr. Panda has already left because he had some engagement after 6. So would you like to start with some, if you have any?
Yes, well, thank you, Manish. I think one of the things is really, what do we do in terms of the, the economic engagement? I mean, there are a lot of suggestions, and what we are seeing now, and there's some disappointment in India that the companies that, there's this fund set up by Japan for reshoring and for diversifying supply chains, but only ASEAN has been mentioned. I think it's important. I know that what Shabani's views are, but what more can we do? I mean, how do we look at this not as purely in economic terms, which of course all businesses will look at, but in strategic terms? Because I think this is, as Nagao-san said, I think a much more closer economic relationship is also required in terms of strategic importance.
Yeah. To respond? Shabani and maybe Nagao later. Shabani, please unmute yourself. Yeah.
This kind of a question, I think in most platforms, when we're talking about Japan, India, bilaterals, we're constantly going back to this thing of what else can be done. I know Ambassador Wadhwa in her tenure had reached out to the prefectures of Japan and had tried to push them to understand that state and prefectures of Japan and states of India need to engage much more. And we've had progressively seen, especially in the southern states as well as Gujarat, they have taken this cue and worked forward on this. I still think, there is enough being done at the government to government level with respect to Japan-India relations. What needs to be done is truly business to business engagements, maybe, identifying associations of, say, pharma sector associations, of IT sectors of Japan and that of India, and then putting them together. We've had teams from CII, from FICCI going every year, but since they're a multi-group, I think that's where we're not able to engage in the right way. Probably, we need someone from Japan's side to actually seek out this kind of an answer which we require. With respect to SEPA, I think it's been more to do with the fact that we've not been able to, as Indian side, haven't been able to understand how to trade with Japan, I think, because Japan's demand on quality, etc., is much higher than what it is many other countries. And India's trading with Japan, the compatibility has been more to do with primary products versus imports in electronics, etc. So that, I think, needs to be sorted out more by educating the concerned sectors which come with this. So I think this is what I would like to add on to Ambassador Wadhwa's queries. And I think I would request Ambassador Wadhwa to actually float a forum where we could get more of industry people to talk and try to engage them to understand the difference of engaging with Japan in both trade and investments.
Nagao, would you like to respond?
Okay. I will answer the question, and I want to reply to about Ambassador Wadhwa's comment too. So first one to answer is about the economy and how to leave from China. In this case, my answer is we cannot underestimate the US move, and so we should think more seriously is my answer. US-China competition has been escalated, and but this move is very strong, I believe, because